welcome to the Fretboard Journal podcast, the show where we explore the guitar stories you are not going to find anywhere else. Are you all ready to get a little geeky? If so, consider yourself warned. I am your host, Jason Verlinde, the guy behind the Fretboard Journal and the Fretboard Summit, and you are about to hear one of the most talked about sessions from the 2023 Fretboard Summit, TJ Thompson and Folkway Music's Mark Stutman in conversation. This one may just rock your world, especially if you consider yourself an acoustic guitar geek. Mark and TJ have been in our magazine before, they've been on our podcast, they've spoken at all the summits we've ever thrown, and that's all my doing. When it comes to high-end, flat-top Martin and Gibson guitars from the golden era, these two repair experts are so in demand and so backlogged, they don't really need to do any marketing at all. But I love the way they think. I love the insanely tiny things they notice in a guitar that most of us would never notice. I consider them good friends, and so I'm grateful every time they offer to share their insights. And here we are. This conversation about everything from popsicle braces to bridge plates to rosettes and the impact they have on sound and 70s Martins and so much more is maybe my favorite talk we've ever had from these two. This conversation is wild. You get to be a fly on the wall and hear two repair authorities at the top of their craft nerd out on the stuff that they obsess over. All the little things, all the percentage points, all the fractions of a percentage point that matter when it comes to a great guitar versus a merely good guitar. There's a lot of food for thought here. There are a lot of ideas I've never heard anywhere else, and it may just change the way you think about your guitars. And this is exactly why I love podcasts so much and doing this particular podcast. We get to share stuff like this with you all. I thought about putting this talk on our new Patreon page, but I want it to be shared. So instead, I'm putting it out there for everybody. And I ask you, if you like this talk, if you're going to share it, if you're glad the Fretboard Journal exists as an outlet for ideas and talks like this that would never appear anywhere else, consider joining our Patreon. It would help me out in a big way. It helps power all that we do. There's a link to our Patreon in the show notes. And if you want to geek out with like-minded people like TJ and Mark and myself, come to our 2024 Summit. We just opened up the registration earlier today. It's going to be August 23rd to 25th, 2024 at Chicago's Old Town School of Folk Music. Our 2023 Summit sold out. We expect 2024 to as well. So get a ticket while you can. Our podcast is brought to you by Peghead Nation, Mike and Mike's Guitar Bar, Isotope, Stringjoy Strings, and Native Instruments. Check out the show notes for some special offers from a few of those brands and links to what we've discussed on this show. Now, this is a 90-minute talk, a few questions from some of the equally talented people in our audience, like Martin legend Dick Boak speak up. I tried to make their voices a little louder, but regardless of whether or not you can hear them, be patient. Everything is explained. And if you want to dig even deeper, go down this rabbit hole even further. TJ and Mark have been on several prior episodes of this very podcast and in the pages of the Fretboard Journal magazine, which is about to release its 53rd issue. Subscribe if you haven't yet. It's going to be a great issue. Last but not least, congratulations to our Truth About Vintage Amps podcast that I co-host with Skip Simmons, an equally geeky look at the world of tube amps. We just had our millionth download of the Truth About Vintage Amps show. And if you really want bonus points, check out our 123rd episode. We kind of talk about the same philosophical stuff that TJ and Mark do about restoring vintage Martins, only it's about 1930s and 40s tube amps and PAs. I didn't plan that. A little moment of synchronicity there, but it just happened. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of our community. And now here we go, TJ Thompson and Mark Stutman live from the 2023 Fretboard Summit.
Thank you all for being here. Hey, TJ.
Yeah, so the online agenda says we have 45 minutes.
No, that was
correct,
a typo.
Right?
That was a typo.
That's typo.
Okay,
well, that's a relief because we can't explain repair and restoration in 45 minutes.
No, we've got.
It's going to take longer than
There's
that.
nothing in this room till 7:30 or 7:15.
Close
those doors, people.
I see people out there with sleep rolls. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, that's right. You're here. Sometimes, yeah.
Or less.
Just the really expensive jobs. So in May, I was down at TJ's shop. I try to get there once or twice a year for some inspiration, much needed inspiration. And I had recently bought a Martin F1. And an F1 was maybe Martin's least successful attempt at archtop guitars. It was maybe the worst archtop ever made. It was a 16-inch F body, and it was a 1, so it was a mahogany back and sides, short scale neck. It was from 1941, so it even has a 40s neck on it, narrow, and it sounded terrible. It looked really great, but it sounded terrible.
So some outrageously cool bones, fair to say.
Outrageously cool bones, white ivory binding, right? So kind of style 18, but with white binding. It was really neat. And so I brought it with me to TJ's in May. And I was like, I got an idea, TJ. How about, because I want a TJ, I don't have a TJ guitar. I'm left-handed, so I can't just easily go get most any guitar. So I was like, this is the in there. TJ, how about we make this into a flat top, style 18. You direct me and I'll do it, and I'll come back we'll get as far as we get, and I'll come back in the fall, and then I'll come back next spring, and then I'll come back and by 2029 I'll have this guitar. And so TJ is like, okay. And we started into it. We looked at tops and stuff, and then TJ said, well, but if I show you how to do this guitar and you'll do it, it won't be a TJ guitar. And he's right. So we came up with this idea that he would build a guitar while I was there. I'll pay him for the guitar. And in the process, I'll get a lesson from TJ on how to do a TJ style conversion. I've done a few conversions, but there's a lot that goes behind the curtain in Oz, and so I was really excited. Anyways, long story short, the second decision after choosing the top was, what is this guitar going to look like? And I like simple guitars in style 18. And I said, but TJ, I really like those style 28 rosettes, with the celluloid inner rings that are mixed with maple, and he did that.
Yeah. We kept hitting these sort of spots where it's like, okay, how much do I talk about this? What do I say? And because you want to do what the guy wants, right? You want to make him happy. At the end, you want him to be like, that's what I wanted. But because he was there, I got to sort of talk him through every aspect of what I was thinking about, why I didn't want to do it the way he was thinking that I thought he would want to do it.
And so, every Collings and Santa Cruz guitar that I love the rosette on is one of these mixes of celluloid and wood. They're absolutely beautiful rosettes on those two guitar companies' guitars. And the 30s guitars, if you look at a Martin guitar from the early 30s, it will often have a mix or the late 20s, actually, like those Koas have that mix of that celluloid inner rings and the wooden outer rings, and it's just gorgeous, right? And I wanted that, and TJ said, no.
I like that look too. And sometimes I have to do it if I'm in restoration or whatever, or if somebody asks me to sort of replicate something,
right,
I have to go down that path, yeah.
So this was clearly not a restoration job. I have almost 25 years of being a professional repair guy under my belt. I think I have a clue. I think I know what's going on. And I could not conceptualize why TJ was saying no. He wants a wooden rosette. And I said, well, it doesn't look as good. So this is what he said.
Oh, you want me to say why? Okay.
You tell me.
Well, I'm going to attempt to not go all woo-woo on you here, but there's percentages. Can we get 1% here? Can we get 2% here? What about 4%? What about 7%? So what we're talking about is, because we're replacing the top anyway on this guitar, so I get to have control over all those little percentage things. And I know what this guy wants. He's going to be impossible to please. So I have to get every percent I can possibly draw to have him go, in Canadian, like he swears in Canadian. It's unbelievable. Have you ever heard anybody swear in Canadian? When I say, like, I don't bother to swear because it just sounds stupid when I do it. But like he says things like, fuck me. And I'm like, it's like my kids are there and I don't even care. It's like funny.
Okay.
I can't do it.
All right, let's
But
get past my grammar.
no, these Canadian, I mean, you can do it in front of your kids. They're probably like, Dad's so funny.
No.
But if I did it, they'd be like, that's crude. Anyway, get him to swear in front of you if you can. It's just a riot. What were we talking about?
Right.
Oh,
So
the percentages.
You're
right.
explaining percentages and why the
Right,
yeah.
right. So the thing about the rosette is, and I explained to him that its purpose is to stabilize that part of the guitar, right? It's kind of in that area where you can expect it to collapse if you don't support that area. And that's kind of gotten lost. Like I see a lot of modern guitars, I'm like.
So hang tight here. Like, just go back to that. The rosette's purpose is to support the top. The top is, the guitar's trying to fold up at the waist. You remove 4 inches of spruce right where the guitar wants to fold up the most.
Right.
And,
Got
and
180
so
pounds of tension, whatever.
to offset that, you glue in rosette strips to add structural integrity back to the sound hole area. Now, I learned how to build guitars in 1997, and nobody ever told me that. I just made a cool Canadian rosette with inlaid spalted maple, right? And it never dawned on me. I always thought the rosette was there to stop like pickwear from destroying your sound hole.
Right.
25 years of fixing guitars later, it never crossed my mind. Like what the heck? Sorry, I interjected. Go ahead.
Did you say heck?
I said, what the heck?
He's holding out. As the interview goes on, he'll loosen up. So I want to go back to that, like when I learned, 180 pounds of tension, I thought, at the time I weighed 145. So the guitar that I was building, I thought, this should be able to hold me. So I braced the neck, I stood on it. I stepped on the top of the guitar. I put some paper down and stuff so I wasn't going to wreck it. It was the first guitar I made.
It wasn't going to wreck it. Yeah.
And I stood on the top. I thought, well, if it can hold 180 pounds of tension and I weigh 145, there's no risk here, right? So I'm standing on the guitar top. I did it in private. But that experience, sort of in a visceral sense and way, helped me understand these things, these little percentage points that I was trying to, in this case, like impart to Mark. And so I thought, this rosette, it's 1.5%. It's almost nothing. It's not even worth quibbling about unless you know the guy well and you know he's going to be even happier if you've pulled out all those stops and gone for it. And so rather than like just go on, okay, we'll do it. Okay, that's fine. You want to look at that? We'll do that. I said, no, I'm going to steer. Let me steer this. And so I explained to him that if I used the strips that I cut to take the place of the celluloid, that area is going to be stronger because the bond between the celluloid and the wooden rosette rings is that can give, right? That can stretch. We want to minimize that as much as possible because if that's the point in which it's going to collapse, then we want to minimize that. And so when I see these rosettes are like part way around it, they're approaching it like it's decoration. It's not just decoration. So I don't speak about this in public. When Mark asked me about it, he said, were you willing to take this bullet? Because there's likely to be people in the audience who are doing decorative rosettes. I was like, you know what, as long as they're reinforcing it underneath like a classical guitar, no issue. But if I look in there with a mirror and there's no reinforcement, this is a tough lesson. If you're doing that, I would advise you to stop. Reinforce the inside if you want it to be decorative. That's fine. I don't have an issue with that. So Mark's like, what's going on here? This was originally maybe going to be called Things I Learned in TJ's Shop. And the reason for that was because I'm embarrassed to say I've never been to Mark's shop. I could be called Things I Learned in Mark's Shop. Maybe we'll do one of those one day.
One day.
But for now, these are revelations that Mark, what happened is last time he was there, after the 6th time he said, fuck me. I said, maybe we should do a thing like at our talk, because I was slated to speak. And I said, let's talk together and you can talk about those times that you exclaimed, what the? Because I figured if this guy's exclaiming that, maybe other people would be interested in some of this, and why let it go to waste?
So that's our angle here is we're gonna look at a few aspects of guitars with our specific strengths in vintage guitars. We're going to talk about vintage guitars, but there are going to be things that were surprising to me and will likely therefore be surprising to people who have spent less time fixing guitars than the two of us. But the rosette thing is really interesting thing. I mean, I have made a career out of reshaping collapsed tops on Gibsons.
Right, right.
But it was still a foreign concept to me that was the real reason
that
the rosettes were made out of. I wonder why Martin switched, why they switched to celluloid rosettes. I mean, they would have known that was the reason too, but
in the early 30s.
Yeah, like why would they switch to celluloid? It was easier and faster. I guess they're manufacturing.
Yeah, it's easier and faster.
Yeah.
But
anyways, but yeah, rosette. So
I'm glad Dick Boak missed that part. All right, we can get back to the program.
So on the subject of top deflection, I was recently resetting the neck on a really valuable advanced jumbo. And this was around the same time as this. This was maybe like a month before I was at your shop.
You're going to take a bullet now?
I'm taking a bullet.
All right.
I was resetting the neck on this advanced jumbo. It was like like the $90,000 variety of advanced
Did
jumbo.
it have a plastic rosette?
Plastic rosette.
Okay.
And it was a totally straight, clean guitar, all the regular Gibson terrifying things that you have to deal with when you're resetting the neck on one of those. I got the neck off fine and clean, and I started changing the neck angle, removing material from the heel until I got the neck angle where I wanted. And I have this way where I kind of flex the neck, and I can rough fit the neck well enough that if I flex it in a certain way, I can get a feel for how the guitar is going to sort of like bend into itself under string tension. And I have a really good track record of setting necks, and it's exactly where I thought it was going to be. And this guitar just wouldn't cooperate. And so I'd flex it, and then the whole neck angle would pitch down, and I'd be underset. I'd take some more off, Anyways, I had taken off more than 1/8 of an inch of heel, which is a ton on a neck. And the shape of the tail of a dovetail, if you're looking from the heel of the guitar through the guitar across the sides, a dovetail is like a triangle, shaped like that. And the more you take off of the sides of the neck, the cheeks of the heel, the closer you get to the top of the triangle of the dovetail. And at a certain point, you can't remove any more material because you're going to just make that dovetail almost non-existent. And Gibsons have very steep sides to the tail. Martins are less steep. Gibsons are much steeper. So you reach that point quicker. So on this advanced jumbo, the heel was already like this thick, and I couldn't take many more off. I couldn't take any more wood off of this thing. And I said, I'm just going to do this, and when I'm finished, I'm going to like hammer some really wide frets at the body, the 11th, 12th, 13th fret, to try to help cant the neck back, like compression frets. Sometimes with bar frets, you can really change a neck angle by putting tight frets there. So I glued the neck on, and I strung it up, and of course, like I've got like bluegrass action with a 1/16 of an inch of saddle. Now, you don't send a guitar to a guy in Canada from, south of the Mason-Dixon line and want them to give you back a guitar with a 1/16 inch of a saddle. Like, that's not cool. I'm like, what am I going to do? And so I was trying to figure out what was going on with this guitar, and being a Gibson, it was wacky. And I figured out that the reason that this was all happening was because the top in the upper bout had been sanded to 75 thousandths of an inch at the factory. Now, normal spec for a guitar of that kind is about 125 thousandths of an inch. So 50 thou or so of top was gone from the sides of the fingerboard because Gibson glued their neck on, and whoever glued it on sanded the living daylights out of the top adjacent to the fingerboard to clean up their glue or whatever reason. Who knows? Gibson. And the top was normal thickness at the bridge. It was 110 or 15 at the bridge, but at where we needed structural integrity, it was 75 thou. And the advanced jumbo was built to be a D28. That was what Gibson was trying to do. So they took a Martin D28 in 1936 when they made that guitar, and they copied it. And they copied all the stupid things that Martin decided to change too, like the no popsicle brace and the really skinny head brace that they had. How thin was the head brace in that time? The upper sound hole brace on a D28. Like, was it 5/16 yet? Was it 3/8? How wide?
Which one are you talking
The
about?
head brace above the sound hole.
Oh, it
transverse-
was a half an inch.
Even in 36, 35?
Yeah.
It was already that thick?
It was way under braced. They all collapsed too.
Okay, so they collapsed too.
Yeah, all those dreadnoughts are way under braced at that you're talking about the big brace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just
And they
above
have
the
no
sound.
popsicle.
You can't even believe it. Yeah, they're so under. They all collapse.
They all collapsed.
They're half an inch. Yeah,
So
just
Gibson
the-
was
just
like,
the
let's make a Martin.
Yeah.
But Martin didn't make guitars that had tops that are 75 thousandths of an inch
No.
thick.
No.
Gibson, they did. And so this advanced jumbo could not handle string tension. With lights, it was kind of okay. With mediums, forget about it. And the whole top, just like, I watched the whole thing like fold from string tension. And so I called TJ. What the heck? TJ, this is my plan. It also, had Martin style sound hole braces. Gibson by then was using these big tall sound hole braces. What had Martin little skinny, less than an eighth of an inch thick sound hole braces. It had no support up there. TJ, I'm thinking about putting a popsicle brace in this guy's guitar. And he's like,
I took a deep breath and I said, Mark, this is a way, way bigger question than whether to put a popsicle brace in this. I said, you have so much more power in this industry than you understand and know. I said, it's time for you to own it.
so here I am. So TJ, he's not joking. That's pretty much verbatim what he said to me. And I'm like, this guy, it's a $100,000 guitar.
Yeah.
And people take out popsicle braces. And you were telling me I should, you agree that I think, and he agreed that I should put a popsicle brace in. And he said, well, I make mine this big, but it's a Gibson. I'm not going to make a beautiful Lutherie style Martin popsicle brace and put it in an advanced jumbo. It looks silly. So I made a J35 style popsicle brace for this guitar. And, but I made it, you couldn't see it, but I tapered it. So it was 3/16 of an inch thick under the sound hole, under the fretboard extension, and tapered out to normal, and then had the Gibson style cuts on it. And then I radiused that. I put a radius into it, and then I made a radiused call, and I glued the whole thing under tension, like I put traction in the guitar, and then glued it all together and let it sit. I got the permission from the owner. So I gave him the whole story, and he's like, do it. And so and it worked. And it worked. It didn't work as well as if I also would have changed the sound hole braces, but we left it there, right? And it worked. And all of a sudden you have this advanced jumbo that is a crazy guitar. It's a beautiful guitar. It's one of the nicest ones I've seen. And now you can actually play the guitar. Why? Because I put in a popsicle brace that it didn't have. And TJ has become phenomenally good at fixing caved sound holes. He spends more time fixing caved sound holes than I spend fixing a lot of Gibson stupidity and putting popsicles in. But you fix those on guitars that didn't have popsicles.
So Dick Boak must be crawling out of his skin over there because it's actually called an upper flat brace, right, Dick? It's the upper flat. There's some confusion about this. The popsicle braces are the ones that surround the sound hole.
Oh, I just
right?
call those sound hole braces.
Yeah. So this is another thing that
Martin speak.
So you all get to learn here with Mark. That's actually called the upper top flat brace, right, Dick? What's he saying?
Yeah.
Did he say sort of?
He said whatever.
Whatever. Okay. Well, the popsicle braces are the ones you see on Martin, the little flat braces under the sound hole. The one he's talking about is the one above the half-inch, 5/8 it's supposed to be, but half-inch tall brace above the sound hole.
One that's here.
We call it the top plate.
Top plate.
And the other one is the top bar.
Top bar.
Top bar. Okay. No, that's a top plate, right?
Top plate.
Top bar. Yeah.
Sound hole brace.
Yeah. Oh, show them where the popsicle things
So
are.
when Martin speak, the popsicles
Yeah.
are here.
Yeah. They're super thin. They do almost nothing.
But in the colloquial UMGF
Yes.
speak,
Yes.
the popsicle is here.
Yeah. Yeah. Just so you know, both terms. One is wrong and one is correct. But sorry to scold you in public, Mark.
So things I learned in TJ's shop, I've always felt popsicle brace removals was not a great idea, but popsicle brace installation is a whole other kind of thing. And both of us feel very strongly about this whole popsicle brace business and trying to avoid the collapse of a sound hole. I mean, you made it like half a career fixing sound holes.
Oh, I've been on that soapbox my whole career, yeah, about adding that whatever he's calling top plate, the thin brace that supports the fingerboard extension, right? Because the ebony is moving differently than the spruce, and so it almost always, right, according to you. Mark has this cool way of checking for the split along the fingerboard extension where he brushes naphtha, lighter fluid, along that edge and then looks inside with a mirror. And he says, what percentage of them are actually
it's
cracked?
almost every single one of them.
That would be 100.
Yeah.
You have a question, Brian?
It's a comment. When you looked at my old D18, I was like, look, TJ, popsicle brace. And you're like, yeah, because it needs one. And you put one in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so Brian's saying in his old D18, I looked at it, I said, no popsicle brace, we got to put one in. So we did. And he gave me permission. And one of the reasons everybody should just put them in, this is me on the soapbox again, is because they're so easy to take out. If at any point you say, you know what, the next client won't buy my guitar because it has that brace, put a damp sponge on it. In 5 minutes, you can pop it out.
That's true.
Because we're putting it in with hide glue. It'll come right back out. In the meantime, you've stopped the sound hole from caving in. You saved yourself $800 and a guitar being devalued. Once it caves, I have to reinforce that whole area underneath the sound hole as well. It's not just that new brace. You have to reinforce the sound hole area and hide all that. And, they're looking in with the mirror. It's like, this is, on some of these guitars, this is a $25,000 hit. And I can't seem to get that through to people. I don't know what the problem is. But can I go back to what, so when he called me and I said, the issue is here. You don't want to own the power that you really have. It's time for you to say to the world, the guitar is the problem. He didn't want to be the guy to alter the guitar, but somebody has to be willing to take that stand. And I'm, I've signed up for that role to some extent. I don't want people taking pot shots at me, but at the same time, somebody has to protect these instruments. And Mark, I was saying, don't leave me hanging out here alone. Take some responsibility. You can do this. Because he didn't want to say to his client, he didn't want to call him and say, I did this to your guitar. And I said, no, that's why he sent it to you, because you are the guy to tell him that if that's true. Say it from the heart. And it was true. He could, and it went fine, right? The guy was fine.
Oh, he's tickled. Yeah.
He what?
Loves it. It went great. Yes.
He said he loved it and it went great.
He hasn't sold it yet. It's perfect.
Yeah. So that was lucky for me, because I was saying, come on, Mark, step up here. Take one for the team. And he did, and the guy was great. He was like, thank you so much. That's why I sent it to you. And I was trying to say to Mark, that's why he sent it to you. Don't think that you can't alter this guitar. You're the guy to make that decision. That's partly why he's here saying it's 75 thousandths. It's embarrassing.
It was embarrassing.
If there was anybody here from Gibson who worked on that guitar at that time, it's embarrassing. It's a mistake. Let's be honest about these mistakes.
Let's just fix these things and make them work.
When they screwed up, they screwed up. So let's just all agree on how best to fix it, and try to fix it in a way that you can reverse it. And then what's the problem? Yeah, David.
For some of us in the audience that are new to luthier and vintage guitar repair, can you talk about the troubles that you guys are experiencing, having those candid conversations with people that own vintage instruments that want to sell them as original, but also are transferring a potentially unplayable instrument to somebody that doesn't know?
He's got a lot to say. You can write a book.
I think the question was, I know the people in the back couldn't have heard that, so let me see if I got it right. He's saying, could you talk a little bit about those conversations with clients and that sort of juncture where you're like, I got to alter your guitar, I'm sorry. Is that the question? Yeah. So, yeah. So the way I handle this is, you can't reach me except through email. And if I don't like the tone of the email, you're not going to hear back from me. And the tone has to be, I know who you are, I know what you do, and I trust you. So I don't have that conversation.
which is a wonderful place to be. But you're the
You got to
only
move up to.
you're the only repair person in the world who can feel that way.
No, he's wrong. That's what I'm saying to him. You have this power. It's time for you to take it,
Well,
own it. And if you have questions about this, call somebody that you want to get a second opinion and say, this is the stance I'm about to take. Would you back me? Would you do this? If you're nervous about it, get someone to back you that you trust. You don't have to do it on your own. I've just been doing it for so long, and the truth is I don't have time to have those conversations. I'm in the shop from 7 or 8 in the morning till midnight every night. That's how I pull this off. And I don't have time to discuss it and explain it. Either you trust me or you don't. But what I can tell you in this group is that I won't do anything unless I have to that can't be reversible. Everything I do is reversible. So it's not, you don't even have to talk about it. But I'll give you something back that sounds the same as what you sent to me, if possible, and that will function the best it can. I hope does that answer the question?
can I focus us back on the? Can I move on from this topic?
Okay.
Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah. All right. But I'll segue, because when you put that popsicle brace in the guitar, because you are making the guitar a more efficient transfer of sound by stiffening a part of the guitar that is weak, if you were able to measure such things, you would probably find that the guitar also sounds better.
Right.
Right? There's better energy transfer between the neck and the body. As you were going to say, there's like a 3% here, or 1% here, like of tone, like the improvements of tone, things that you can do. I suspect if I was able to measure the before and after, which I'm not, that could AJ sounded better after I put that. And I bet you if I put sound hole braces, my kind of sound hole braces in it, it would sound even better still.
Yeah, because the top is really
just stiffening up those areas that are weak. There's other things that affect the sound of a guitar more than you might think. And celluloid in a rosette, it shrinks and it creates cracks. But celluloid, wherever you put it on a guitar, is going to shrink. And it does interesting things.
One of the things that we know in the course of restoration is if you're removing a top or a back and you peel the binding off, it's going to be 1/4 inch shorter. So you take it off and you see, oh, there's a lot of shrinkage here. And you'll find that out when you go to put the back on and you go to put the binding back on in the back, and you've got a gap like this. So I realized from that it's the same effect as when you're tightening a drum of a head and you're cranking this thing, you're tapping the top, it's like bing, 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 and it's getting hot, the pitch is going up. And that's what's happening on the guitars. It's not just the front, not just the top. As that binding is shrinking, it's like the head on a drum getting tightened. And this happening on the back as well. So the whole body is under, God only knows how much stress. We know that if you strip the finish off of that binding, you'll end up with 1,000 tiny checks all the way around. That's one of the ways that the markers for knowing whether a guitar was refinished, by the way. If you see those hundreds or thousands of little checks, and these usually filled with black gunk all the way around, that's been stripped off. And what happened is they took off the finish, which was the only thing left holding it together. So once you take it off and it's exposed to the air, it just blows. But I learned from watching that and restoring guitars, wow, think about what that's doing to the sound. And I knew, well, that's beyond my control. That's 60 years of shrinkage. I cannot replicate that. The other thing that I knew from restoring these guitars is what's happening with the pickguards. I mean, those of you who've worked on old Martins know that area on the treble side of the top is ready to explode if it hasn't already. And a lot of them blow apart on the inside and outside of the pickguard. There's so much tension on it. Imagine what that's doing to the sound. That's hundreds of pounds of tension on that spot on the treble side. And we look at it and we think, oh, they fucked up. Did they? Or is it part of what we like about that sound in those vintage guitars? Personally, I've come to believe I'll take a crack next to that pickguard for that tone, because I think it's a huge piece of what we like about it. It's not just a problem. It also may be contributing to what we love about those guitars. So that's a little bit about the
That's
celluloid.
exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
On a Gibson, because the braces are not tucked like Martins and they're put together not near as nicely, when you do have that cut pickguard, you often do have to take the pickguard off to fix all the braces underneath because they'll never go back. And at that point, like the structural integrity of the top is very heavily compromised. So you do have to take the pickguards off. I do it regularly.
Yeah.
And then we glue it back on. We don't stick them back on, we glue them back on and the best we can to try to replicate what was there. But the years of shrinkage takes its toll, and you'll see how much a pickguard shrinks.
Right, it's like a 16th all the way around.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting. But yeah, you'll take the cracks next to a pickguard. If the rest is fine and you just have pickguard cracks top and bottom, but the rest of the guitar is fine, your braces are attached, don't fix when it broke. Like, it's probably a good, if you don't want to change your guitar's tone, you might want to just leave that pickguard in place. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Do you mind if I go into the wood part of it?
Please.
Okay, so I was asked to come and speak about this one time. The topic was what makes a vintage guitar different from a modern guitar, and that was a fun exercise to kind of try to separate all of those things out. And one of the things that I realized, it was an awkward moment because Richard Hoover, is he here? Richard Hoover?
No,
I don't see him here. Anyway, it was kind of an awkward moment because he had just been speaking on stage saying the thing about spruce that's problematic is that with time it gets kind of punky and soft. And I followed him on stage and I said, this is awkward because I was going to get up here and say the opposite, that my feeling is that actually the wood sort of gets denser and harder with time. And I had a bag of proof because a bunch of these instruments that I had restored, I saved all these pieces. And one of them was from a 5K ukulele that some collector sent me, and the top had been stepped on and it crushed the top. I was able to put that back together well enough, but the bridge plate was ruined and there was part of it was missing. And so I knew I had to replace that. It was 33 thousandths thick. It was a piece of koa, curly koa, beautiful little piece of wood. And I had half of it and it was in my bag. And I pulled it out and I was like, this is like a piece of steel. You couldn't even flex it. It was so dense, super thin. Now I'm in a position where I have to replace this thing. So I start looking I have thousands and thousands of pieces of wood. I would say 1/4 of my shop is just crap wood that I'll never use. But for that one time I needed that little tiny piece of koa, I saved all these boxes of wood. So I go through all the koa. Nothing. I cut it down to 33 thousandths. There's nothing that compares to that. And I finally concluded that piece of wood was not stiff as steel when it was glued in there. That happened over time. So I started taking other braces, little wing braces off of broken up tops and stuff, little tiny braces, this tall. And you couldn't even flex the ends of them where they're cut down to nothing. They're stiff as metal. And so I had this idea that actually something different is happening with the top and the braces, and that it's getting like denser and stiffer with time, and that's contributing to what we like about the sound of the guitars. And another thing that I'm not in control of. I mean, I try to have some control over that. And if people ask me, what are you doing that's different? I pre-saw all of my braces as much as I can, rough cut them at least 10 years before I go to use them. So they're in boxes, like piles of them, just like I'll have 50 braces that I intend to use for the X brace pre-cut. Now this is frustrating for those of you who want to go home and make a nice guitar, but if you're asking me for a tip, I'd say go home and cut all the wood that you expect to use, like bridge plate material, all that stuff. Cut it as close as you can to dimension that you plan to use 10 years from now. Just plan ahead. I mean, I started doing it many years ago, and because I'm running behind on my guitar orders, I'm using wood that I cut 15 years ago, which I just kind of, in my mind, figure, well, this is all good news for those clients who are waiting. Because by the time they get one of my guitars, it's already vintage.
So back to the F1 that when building a TJ. So that weekend in May, we're getting things ready, and when I retop a guitar or build a guitar, I'll glue the X brace in. The next day I'll come back and I'll glue the tone bars in the morning and maybe the finger braces in the afternoon. And over the course of that week, I'll get the top braced and get it ready. and then maybe I'll get a box the next week or something like that. I got other stuff going on. I'm going and coming and coming and going. And so, much to my surprise, TJ at 9 a.m. says, "Okay, let's get going. We got a lot to do." And I'm like, "Okay, like we're going for breakfast?" No, grab a granola bar. We got a lot to do. Got to heat up the room. He goes and turns on the heat in his brace gluing room. He's got some vacuum clamping jigs and where all his braces are. And so I'm raising the temperature in there. He gets it up to 100 degrees. It was kind of like yesterday. And
we had our Speedos on.
It was, anyways, so
I'm glad you weren't there.
he's got the rosette in the top of this time. I've skipped past the whole like choosing tops. Like that's 3 hours of lecture. And he says, "Do you want to choose the braces from his box?" And no. It's your guitar. Like you're gonna. So he chooses the braces like this. He just chooses them. And there's more to that, but that's his technique. But anyways, he gets the first braces glued on, and then I think that we're gonna move on to something else. And he's like, 10 minutes later, we're in there, we're opening it up, and we're putting the next braces on and closing it again. And the whole guitar was braced in an hour, right? And then it came out of the clamps, and then the channels were cut for the braces, and the whole guitar was boxed an hour after that. The box meaning the top was glued on in that same room. And this was like a mind-blowing thing. Like, why are you racing to get this all done? It was super interesting to me. I didn't have any concept that this was a thing. This is a big part of TJ's deal. Why do you do that?
What was the question?
Oh, God.
No, wait. So the question, you're saying that...
Like, why do you insist on getting the braces, guitar box, first brace glued to the top being glued on the guitar
it's
in the same moment?
A lot of it is just psychological.
There's more to that. There's some science in your brain about it. So explain that.
Yeah, well, I wanted to hurry and get to lunch. No, but really, sometimes when you brace up a top, like in back in the 90s or early 90s, I was involved in this project called Schoenberg Guitars, and Dana Bourgeois started doing it with Eric, and Dana was the first builder. He built 154 guitars or something. Then he moved on to build guitars for Paul Reed Smith, which fell apart, and those became the Bourgeois guitars that he's making now. But Eric said, "I'm going to shut this down if you don't take it over." So I became the builder for Schoenberg Guitars, made 154 guitars. I did things differently. Dana used to, Martin would make the braces. They would select the brace material. He would send them the tops, but they would make the braces and glue them on. And I didn't want to do that because they were using aliphatic resin. And I thought, these are the most expensive guitars on the planet. And because Martin charged us the same price that they would charge for the guitar finished. And I had to provide the materials, and there was no warranty. I mean, it was a horror show I don't know why they ever agreed to this, but we had a blast doing it. So I don't regret it, but it wasn't a great business plan. But I wanted to do things differently. I thought, we're already losing money. Why don't we lose some more? And so I took on also bending the sides at this point. So I started bending all the sides for these guitars because they were bending them into a cutaway, and as great as they weren't using side bending jigs. They were doing it by hand, and the cutaways would break. And at that time, Brazilian rosewood was really hard to get. And we were just heartbroken every time we got the message, we need more wood, because we were running out of wood. And the hard part was, how do we match this wood? So now we're selling the most expensive guitars on the planet, and we're providing it with woods that don't match. It just felt terrible. So anyway, so I wanted to do things. I started bending the sides. I also started bracing the tops. So think about that. I was bracing all the tops for those guitars in my shop on my own, putting them in a box, shipping them to Martin overnight. So imagine we get an order for 22 guitars, and I have to build 22 tops in 2 days. So that's really partly the answer to your question. How is that possible? That's a lot of tops. But one of the things that I learned in the course of that project, and the reason I bring this up, is you don't want those tops laying around very long, right? I see Michael Gurian shaking his head. You know what I'm talking about. when you're changing environments, you make it in one environment, you take it to another, like say a FedEx truck, maybe a UPS truck, then it's going into Martin. That was the problematic side of that whole plan. I wanted to use hide glue because we're selling these guitars for so much money. I thought, I want to give these people this percentage more. Even if it's just psychological, I wanted to offer that. And so I decided I'm going to do this. So it was crazy. It probably cost me my marriage, if I'm being perfectly honest, because it was so much work. But I wanted to do it the way I wanted to do it. And the part of the reason that's what I meant by it's partly psychological. There's a real aspect of it that if you take it out of this environment to a different environment, it's going to move. You don't know if it's going to move this way or this way, right? Roger, you have a question? Roger?
Yeah, so I learned the same thing even within my shop. I would break the top, and if it didn't get to it quickly, maybe you got to go 48 hours. Like you're in, okay, the back and the top breaks and the box example. And it was so
Yeah. So Roger's saying he experienced the same thing. Michael Gray's still shaking his head because this is a bad situation. You now have all this time, all this material invested in this, and you're going backwards, and it's not a good feeling. Or you decide to keep going forward, and then you have that sinking feeling in your stomach of like, I hope it doesn't cause problems later. Because you saw that the top was starting to sink, but you glued it on anyway. And then it just doesn't feel right. So that's a long way of saying.
But there was more to it. I feel like that,
More?
Yeah.
He wants more.
No, but I feel like there was, at that moment, maybe you were just feeling more adamant about things, but it was more about the body as a whole and assembling everything at the same time. Yeah. Sure. Of course, things don't move, but for some, it felt like there was more to it than that you wanted it all to be together as fast as possible.
He's projecting.
Yeah.
No, but in that case, like where Roger's talking about, he built that body, he built that back, he built those sides. In this case, we're just attaching the top to a pre-built body. So that's what I mean by psychological. If we were building the whole body, that would probably be true.
Right.
But I was probably just moving because I felt like I didn't want the top to start to move.
Right.
And we had the room heated up, and it costs a lot of energy to heat the room to 100 degrees. So if we were to let it cool down, come in the next day, try to heat it back up, it's no fun heating that thing up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But could I just say something
please.
before you go on to your next point? So I don't know how many people here work on these old Martins, but he's talking about a 1932, right? A 32, the F?
Yeah, 41. No, it's an arrow.
41?
It's a wartime. Yeah, 41.
1941?
The F1.
You have me working on a 41?
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. No, I thought he was talking about a 32. I'm thinking of a different instrument, but I'll make this point anyway. But to me, it's like, even in 41, they were cool. Nothing against your guitar, but 32, that's my era. That's what I really resonate with. And those few people who made those guitars, it's the same people who made the guitar that we're saying was useless. It wasn't a useful guitar. It was so bad, we're disassembling it and reassigning it a new life. That's how bad it was. The same people made the ones that we revere as the greatest guitars ever made. It's bizarre. So even in 41, but 32 especially, like sometimes if we have to replace a top or some of the arch tops, they're just awful guitars. And then you can turn them into some of the greatest guitars on the planet, but they're made by those same people. And you're thinking, oh, just this far away from having a $150,000 guitar instead of a $5,000 guitar, right? Because if it had the 45 style top instead of that arch top, it would be worth a small fortune. So anyway, that I've been known to go off on a tangent or two. Thank you for. Yeah, Roger's shocked to hear that.
So we braced that guitar, and I play guitar left-handed, and this was a discussion point for us. Like, well, how do you want to brace this guitar?
Oh yeah.
So I don't own a left-handed acoustic guitar. Not one. I only own right-handed acoustic guitars that I've converted into left-handed guitars. And so we had a whole discussion about this. Well, do we brace it lefty or do we brace it righty? I've owned left-handed. I've had a few left-handed LOOs. I've had left-handed J45s and 50s SJs. I've played left-handed Martin D18s, and I owned a pre-war 017 that was lefty, and I don't have any of those anymore. I'm sorry if any of you own those now, but they were not near good enough to keep. Just because they were lefty doesn't mean they were good. So all my own guitars are guitars that were righty. I finished working on them. I strung them up. I played them upside down. And I was like, whoa, this is a good one. And then I decided I'm going to keep this guitar and convert it to lefty, thereby making it worthless. And but all my favorite guitars are these old right-handed, well, Gibsons in my case, and they're all now lefties and upside down. And so TJ and I were trying to figure this all out. Should we brace it lefty or should we brace it righty? And does it make a difference or does it not make a difference? And so we were thinking, like, maybe what I like in a guitar and an acoustic, maybe a good acoustic for me is a guitar that's actually braced righty, because it does something when the bass's side is tightened up a little bit because of the direction of those two tone bars. Maybe I like the trebles to be more open, and that's why I like the sound of those thick, woody, dark trebles that I like. Who knows? Now, TJ's built some left-handed guitars, and he's built some right-handed guitars. And what's that guitar that you built that was maybe a possible
You're throwing
answer?
it back to me?
Yeah,
Okay.
to that question.
So what's hilarious about this is that when left-handed people come to you as a guitar maker, the reason they're coming to you is to get those tone bars on the correct side for a left-handed guitar. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, there's no correct side. And so in the early days, in the early like 90s, I think, in my career, I would go to these Asia conventions, they were called, and people would be like nitpicking the most small detail like it was some big deal. And I was always like, I don't think it's a big deal. This is about the same time I'm standing on the top of my guitars. And so I had this idea that I was just gonna invert the braces, switch it around, and make it basically build a left-handed guitar, but for a right-handed player. And actually, that guy is here today. His name is Greg Hutton. He's sitting in the audience today. And and so I switched his braces around. And at that show, at that very show, like, I'm the only person who knew it. And I took it to the show, and Martin Simpson, this fabulous British guitar player, was there. And he was a rep for Sobel guitars, and he came around my booth and played it and just was floored. And he asked me if he could play it that night at his concert. He was putting on a concert that night, and he asked me if he could play that guitar, and I was so flattered. In the back of my mind, I'm just laughing my ass off because I had inverted the braces. And so he's actually playing a left-handed guitar, and it's the one that he flipped over at the show. And so it just kind of reinforced for me that a lot of this stuff, it's up for grabs. And so as Mark was kind of thinking this through, I was like, I've been down this road before, and we can do this anyway, play it any way you want. Let's just make you happy. And even if it's psychological, right? It may be that that's just what you're used to, right? It may be that, because in my case, like, because I grew up listening to Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young, that's what I want to hear. That's what seems correct. What if I'd grown up listening to Taylor Swift? Maybe that would seem correct. Or the Indigo Girls. It's interesting, to think about that. But we have to be careful about our judgments about what is right. But at the same time, damn it, we're going to be right about it.
So we braced it righty, in case you're wondering. It's braced righty. It's boxed. I have to make another trip down to TJ's to do the next part. But it's all boxed up, and it's right-handed. And TJ even had the original mold from Martin.
Thank you, Dick Boat.
He's got like one original mold from Martin, and it's the F guitar mold.
Yeah, and I got that one because Dana Bourgeois took the one I wanted.
So so we put this guitar back in the mold that it was born in.
Yeah, it actually fit right back in.
It was pretty cool.
We just put the waist spreader in there and the mold. It was like it just grew in there.
So next year we'll give you another update on where that's where it's at. But so after the guitar was braced, we took it out. TJ then carved the braces, which were rough carved already. Like he said, he carved them. Was it a router jig? Like, were they all routed out?
Oh, just the X.
Just the X
just the
was
X,
routed.
yeah.
Well, the tone bars had shape to them, and the fingers had shape.
yeah,
They were all
yeah.
shaped.
Oversized, yeah.
Oversized, but shaped.
Yeah.
And you can do that when you have a vacuum clamping system. You're not using sticks pushing down on things. And so, but then he went to do his braces, and he grabs his brace carving chisel, and he clamps the top to his bench, and he just starts going carving his braces. And really 10 minutes later, he's done, right? Like, and I was expecting, this is like Giuseppe in his workshop, right? I'm expecting to see him like slaving over the shape of those braces and like just making sure that the scallops are just so. And then after he does it, I was expecting him to grab like a perfectly contoured sanding block that, just get it all. No, just done. Shiny braces, done. And he said, no, this is by design. I'm not being lazy here. I want those shiny surfaces on the brace because of the way the wood is going to age when it's shiny. It's very different. A planed surface, a chiseled surface, is going to age differently. It's going to interact with oxygen differently over time than a sanded surface, which is another really cool thing, right? This is a big part of his guitar tone.
I never would have told him this if I thought he was going to announce it in public. It's so outrageous. I have no idea if it's true. So forgive me.
It's got to be true. His guitars sound incredible. Like, tell us more. That's a cool thing.
It might be another percent. Maybe it's another couple of percent. The way I do kind of think it's true. I mean, the reason I do it is showing off to other guitar makers. I was buddies with some great furniture makers, and what they would talk about was the other furniture maker friends who would hand plane the top of their tables. I mean, being able to hand plane a curly surface, you have to know what you're doing. You have to know how to sharpen a plane, man. And it's a different experience when you put finish on that. It's so beautiful, the depth of the grain. So people here know what I'm talking about. It's a completely different experience. So it really comes out of that experience I have talking to my furniture maker friends. The guitar maker thing, it's not terribly relevant, but it's just kind of fun. It's just this detail that I can control. And maybe it is a couple percent. Maybe it's psychological, who knows? But I do feel like it can affect the way the wood ages. And it does that thing that I'm thinking of as case hardening, getting stiffer. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it also brings ourselves to like, okay, well, what about sanding the inside surfaces of that guitar? Like, what grit are you going to sand that to? Do you sand it to 120 grit, or 320 or 600? Do you lacquer the inside like some builders do? And it's more percentages.
Right. I told you I was at the Brian Gallup thing, and I had the good fortune of hearing Michael Bashkin speak. Is he here today? Michael Bashkin? Where is he?
He's in the room showing his guitars. He's not here.
Okay. Well, anyway, he talked about this in sort of a different way. He was talking about how he has all these jigs and fixtures that allow him to do certain tasks really quickly without having to think about it or stress about it. And it's so he can make time for other things that he can sort of stress over, cosmetic things really that just make him feel good about it. And this kind of gets in that territory a little bit where, it might make a difference to scrape the sides, but for God's sake, I got to make a living. So right. I'm just drawing the line somewhere. It's like, I don't care about that percent, but things that I can do kind of quickly, I'll just do it because when you look inside with the mirror, like that's the stuff that I see. All those braces look great, but everybody sands them, which is fine. There's no judgment about it. But to me, it's like, I'm sort of influenced in what I do in this business more by the violin makers than guitar makers. I always read about violin making and classical makers. So that's really where I tried to draw from those more than the way people were making steel string guitars. It just interested me more. And then I would take what I learned from those folks and try to apply it to the steel string genre as much as I could. So that's partly where it comes from.
Yeah, for sure. The whole like little percentages adding up is, as you can see, it's a recurrent theme here. And I firmly believe that if you glue a saddle on a guitar, your guitar is going to sound better. Even like if I had my druthers, I would glue drop-in saddles in guitars. They just sound better. High glue, sure, you can get it out. It's no problem. Gluing the nut in, making sure the nut is fit properly, that there's no little air gaps underneath it, and gluing your frets in if you're doing T frets. Even if they're sitting nice and tight, a little super glue in there, you actually hear the difference. What you hear the difference a lot in is when you play a guitar that has bar frets, though, and that's TJ's deal. And it's interesting. I don't know if you've ever done a test where you have a guitar that had T frets and you changed it for bar frets and you were able to hear that. Have you ever done that kind of thing where a T fret guitar comes in and you route all the slots and you make it into a bar fret guitar? Has any customer asked you?
I have done that. Yeah, not my own, but I don't do it anymore. But years ago, if it was a client that I really liked, they could sometimes talk me into taking the time to convert their T fret guitar to bar frets. And the reason I mostly wouldn't bother is because part of the equation that makes that so worthwhile is the ebony bar that's glued in the neck as well. So you lose that whole 30% of the equation. You're just gluing the frets into, you're putting in oversized frets with an adjustable truss rod. You're only getting a certain percentage of the effect. So it's not satisfying to me.
Okay.
But if there's somebody who really wants to feel the bar frets, then I get why they want that. It's a totally different feel.
So from a tonal perspective,
It
take the board off ebony.
It's a percentage increase, but it's not satisfying to me.
Gotcha.
You might get 10%, but I'm looking for 20.
I notice when I do a T fret refret and I put big frets in a guitar, I like the sound of it. I had a guy come in with a D18 and he wanted me to put Dunlop 6105 in there, which is what like Fender uses on their custom shop guitars. Like this big, tall, 55 thou tall wire. So 50 and, like a third taller than normal acoustic wire, 10% wider, a lot more mass in the fret. And that D18 sounded so good with those big frets just because of that mass. This morning, TJ and I were talking about 70s Martin guitars. I work on a lot more 70s guitars than TJ does. And most of us have played more 70s guitars than 30s guitars. And there's something about, in the 70s, Martin put these big rosewood bridge plates in their guitars. And for a long time, people would have us take those bridge plates out of their guitars. And I used to blindly do that for people, but then I was discovering that on a number of those guitars, they were coming back a couple years later, and the top would be distorted. There'd be bulges where there weren't before, and I got myself a top thickness gauge and decided to start measuring the top thickness of every guitar that I worked on. And lo and behold, those guitars with the rosewood bridge plates measured thinner. The tops on those guitars, like if a 60s guitar had a average top of 120, 25 thou, the 70s guitars had tops that were 105 thou frequently with those rosewood bridge plates. And so my thought was like, hey, what's the chicken or the egg here? Did they thin the tops to get more bass, but put the big rosewood plate in there to offset it? And so TJ has done this like way more than I have. I thought you might have a thought on that one. What do you think's going on there with those 70s Martin guitars? And I know it's weird to take you out of your 30s world, but once upon a time, you worked on a lot of 70s Martin guitars.
Yeah.
Right? So you might not think of it. This guy's got more 70s Martin experience than most anybody.
Yeah, I have 100 of those bridge plates in a drawer somewhere.
Yeah, so what do you think was going on with Martin there? What do you think was the order of operations in their thought when they're going to those big bridge plates?
Right.
Did they think to make the top thinner?
Mark was sort of theorizing that maybe it was intentional, that they were trying to get a certain sound. And that's an interesting thought. It might be true. That could be. My take on it was that it was both, that it had to do with warranty, and they made the top thinner and put a bigger bridge plate on, that it wasn't they didn't just add the bigger bridge plate. That's what he was saying. Maybe they didn't just stick this bigger bridge plate in there for warranty purposes. Maybe they actually made the top thinner, put the bigger bridge plate on to add stability, and that was a tone that they were going for, which is fascinating. I never really thought about that way. I just, Dick, you have a... that's where I'm going. That was what I said. Yeah.
But why big ones? And why was the top thinner? If they had extra rosewood, like... Yeah, they are. But maybe they just were building guitars and they were heavier handed with their stroke sander to get it done quicker or something.
Yeah. So
He's retired now.
Dick had the same reaction I did. I said, "You're giving Martin too much credit." Oh,
Daryl, what did you do?
you got to repeat the question.
Oh, Daryl's asking
I may not be
if
the
when
only
you
person.
did the rosewood bridge plate removal, what would you put in its place?
Oh, well, first let's talk about the bridge plate. So to Dick's point, he said they had a lot of extra rosewood. So it wasn't just ordinary rosewood. This stuff was crap. This is the reason I took it out. It was throwaway, flat sawn Indian rosewood. And once you took it out, it's like this. It had no stiffness. So that's why, I thought, having taken a lot of those out, I thought maybe Mark was not on the right track there. When you see a Brazilian rosewood, a nice Brazilian rosewood plate, maybe. So that's one answer to your question. You might just take that out and put in a nice piece of Brazilian rosewood, and you're likely to get the response that Mark was suggesting maybe they were going for, but not that Indian stuff that they had in there. It was just awful. And there's like white glue all over the place. It's just a mess. But
Would you put a maple one in? Or
yeah, I always put maple in there. When I took it out, I would clean up the whole area, make sure the braces were glued on solid, and I'd replace it with maple. That's really kind of what my clients wanted, and it was sort of the direction that I wanted to go to because they were looking for that more vintage sound. And those guitars are incredible. If you can pull that off and get those plates out, what I explain to people is, you don't know how stiff that top is. Once the braces go on, you have no idea. You can kind of try to map it out from the stress on the top and pressing and stuff, but really you don't know. I need to feel it and flex it before I can make that determination. So I say, I'll make my best guess and I'll decide, and if I decide to do it, if it doesn't work 10 years from now, I'm not responsible for this. I'll do my best, but you have to be prepared to pay for a new top. So I cover my ass up front like that. But the ones that I did, as far as I know, they're all still holding together, and those clients are super happy with them. It's a different guitar. If you can get through that repair and it turns out the top actually was a decent piece of spruce, there's some real crap out there, though. You have to be super careful. And the same is true with the braces. Some of those braces are crap. But if you get one that has a stiff top and good braces, there's no reason to not switch it out. You'll have a happy customer for life.
Yeah, they sound really good when you do it right. The one thing that I learned the hard way is that I was using heat to remove bridge plates, and a lot of it for those huge rosewood bridge plates. And what I didn't know 20 years ago was that I was compromising the glue joint along the X brace and the top as well. And that's what was coming back to me, are these guitars that after 5 years of string tension with a compromised glue joint under the bridge, the X brace is separating from the top underneath the bridge. All kinds of problems, right? So now, well, A, you don't use stupid amounts of heat, but B, whenever I do anything involving removing a bridge or removing a plate, I make sure to glue that area of the X brace, even if I don't know that it's loose. I'm always checking that. And it's a good thing to tell your repair people to do on your guitars.
And it's something I learned from Mark. I never really thought about that, but it makes perfect sense. You're heating the bridge off. I think the moral of the story is to be careful to not use more heat than you need to. Right? Sometimes I'd put the foil caul around. I'd go get a drink while the heat lamp's on there. Come back, it's like a lot of smoke there. But now that Mark has told me, that his idea about, well, you may be compromising that glue joint, I'm going to stop going to get a drink. Joe, you have a question?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, Joe was reminding us, if you couldn't hear that the bridges on those early 70s guitars on the dreadnoughts are in the wrong place. They're located an eighth of an inch too close to the sound hole on the treble side and 3/16 too close on the bass side. So you have to shift the whole thing back like this. And the way I do that, the way Martin used to hire me to do it, because I was a service station, I never did it. But their solution was to send a giant bridge. You stick another bridge plate over the big rosewood in there, then put a giant bridge on the top. Can you imagine? Oh my God, like that's a way to have an unhappy client the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So I never did it. I would have Martin pay me the $40 or $50 or whatever it was. I'd take the $50 and then I'd apply it and I'd say, here's what they'll give me. Here's what you have to give me to do it the way I know you're going to be happy with it. So the way I do it is I take the bridge off, take the bridge plate out, put the maple plate in, touch it, put the bridge where it's supposed to be, mark it, and then touch up the finish. I would always touch up. Who cares? I'd much rather have the proper size bridge and some touch up than a giant bridge on there. Joe.
What's ridiculous about it is there's another approach to that, which is use the same footprint. You just move the pinholes back and the saddle. You can't just move the saddle back. It's so close to the great hand.
Yeah.
But you always ways needed at the time that actually why the solution came up. That wasn't a very good solution. It's just as easy to use the same footprint. You're talking about plugging the bridge hole to down, or change the bridge plate, and then you just want to the top.
Right.
I hope everybody heard that. This little bit of the discussion reminds me of a little factoid that might be of interest. This is how I met Dana Bourgeois that launched me into this career. I had this D35 and I was playing with a flautist and she's like kind of doing this, I was like, what's going on? You find this if you're trying to play with a pianist too. You can play in G, you can play in one chord, you can get it tuned, but then when you tune to another, they want to switch keys or you're trying to play another chord, all of a sudden it doesn't work. And that's when I started to suspect it wasn't her flute. She knew right away. She's like, there's something wrong with your guitar. I said, this is a Martin. I spent a lot of money on this guitar. It can't be my guitar. So I was in denial for years. And then I was introduced to Dana by Eric Schoenberg because Eric was my friend and guitar teacher. And he knew Dana, and that was the connection. And so he said, well, I know this guy who might be able to help you with that problem. So that's how I met Dana. He fixed he actually, it's related to this conversation, he routed out the saddle slot so it was oversized and then just bumped it back. And it was kind of a quick and dirty repair, but it was way better and it would function anyway. But it's kind of funny to think back on that and how he fixed it. But we can all keep it a secret among us. We won't have to tell him that I told you. His quick and dirty hack.
I have a bunch more little cheater points here in my notebook, but I thought that maybe there might be more questions from people instead of looking at my notebook.
Should have a drink of water too.
Okay, I will. No, it's just boxed up. That's where he comes in because he's doing the work. Go ahead. Neck angle. How do you deal with the neck angle on a F or C conversion? The forward reset.
Oh,
what's your system?
I got to talk about Ken Parker a little bit then, and to some extent Joe Glazer, because those are kind of guys who help me understand. You got to get over your fear, to the way Ken Parker put it to me. You got to get over your fear of oil and wood. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not going to put anything with oil near my wood. He's like, oh, no. You have to get this equipment into your shop that will help you do these things more efficiently and better and quicker. And so I bought a milling machine. And I used to do this by hand. So what he's talking about is when you take the archtop neck angle like this and you bump it forward, you have to trim 3/16 of an inch off the top of the heel. Normally we're trimming it off the back and setting the angle back. He's saying, well, how do you tilt it forward? Because there's a steel bar in there that's 1/2 inch deep, right? It's called the T-bar, and it's shaped like a T, and it's really strong metal. And so how do you cut through that? So the way I used to do it is it was difficult. I would saw as much as I could off of the dovetail, and then I would chisel. I'd stay away from the T-bar, and then I would use a Dremel tool with one of those abrasive wheels and just start cutting it. I'd get it as close as I could, then I'd put it in the vise and file it. And all that, the problem with that is the more you're putting those tools and files near the wood, the greater risk that you're going to mess something up. You're counting on your hand skills. And so once I got the milling machine, I just had to make a fixture that I could hold the neck, because it's tapered. So you can't just put it in your vise. You got to make a fixture to hold it. So I did that. I was able to lock it in the milling machine vise. And then I just took a long end mill and I'd start dropping it down 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch until I got to the T-bar, and then I just trim it off, and it's perfect. Oh, he's saying, what about the 14th fret? It's going to be that's right. It's a 13.5 fret guitar now. Yeah.
But you're putting the bridge, you're bracing it knowing that.
No, it looks really cool. You just have to explain that to the client.
You have to shift your sound hole down too, or you do what I did on my first conversion, and I have the fingerboard extending too far over the sound hole, and it doesn't look like a Martin. All this work in the world, and I miss that variable, and it looks like crap. R18. Yeah.
He just mentioned the R18. That's an even worse guitar than the one that Mark has.
Some of them are great.
Oh, okay.
No, some of those are great.
Oh, that's
Better than, for sure. Some of those are great.
Better than the Fs?
Yeah, for sure better than the Fs. Absolutely.
Really?
A round hole R18 could be a great guitar.
Really? Okay, I stand corrected. Oh, no. Yeah.
Do it.
Have you heard a good F-hole one?
An R18? I've heard okay F-hole R18s.
That's a no. Dick, do you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to say, it's fun to beat up on Martin. I'm having fun doing it too. But I want to point out that Martin has gone through lots of different stages, different time periods, different levels of competency, different groups of employees, different levels of understanding of the guitar. And Martin has done a lot of things very right, and Martin has made some mistakes also, plenty of them. And I just want to say that. That's all. It's just a bunch of people making guitars like we are, and going through different stages. I think the level of understanding of guitars has been so elevated in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
To people like you do, and Martin has learned along with you.
Right on.
Well, if all they had made were the F-hole Fs and the Rs, they would be great. We'd consider them great guitars. It's just that they made these other guitars that were astonishingly good. And in contrast, those look less interesting. Well, we sometimes do. Yeah.
They're almost like they didn't want to own the art stop, like it's minimal go all in with carved backs.
Yeah. It's a half-ass effort.
Who knows? There's some flatback archtop guitars that sound absolutely heavenly. They just don't usually say Martin on the headstock. So, you know, both Regal and Gibson were making some great ones. What's that? Sure.
I export a 32 tuxedo 12 what do you know? Do they make only tuxedos in 32? Do they have white or black buttons?
Depends on the model.
And how many do they make?
God knows.
And were all the tuxedos in 32?
32 and 33. Yeah, so 14 fretters showed up in the end of 32 and into 33, we think. We're all going by Joe Span's book, right? And Joe Span's book is an amazing reference. It's incredible. It's a ginormously huge piece of work to compile that. But those data points are guitars that were seen. That's where all those factory order numbers, when there's a gap, it's because no one's seen that factory order number and reported to Joe. And Joe is basically cross-referencing factory order numbers with serial number lists. And we don't have shipping records before 1935. So we don't really know. It's all good guesses. There's some good educated guesses going on with that book. So we have to be careful about saying this is a 32. We don't know. Right. Yeah, they put on LOOs, you'll see painted black, white binding that was painted black on those. It's not common, but it's not terribly uncommon either. Gibson needed to make an LOO and they had too many necks with binding on them for like Recording Kings or something that weren't sold. They would just take it and paint it black. Black paint is your best friend if you're a Gibson employee. Everything was painted black, you know? And the funny thing is that we pay a premium now for those guitars that have black accents on them. Skunk stripes and stingers, and it's hysterical. Yeah.
I had another couple of questions on the tip of that structure. Because the tip of the brace is right down to the lines.
I think it has a ton of effect on the tone. I think that's a...
Could you repeat the question? I can't
So
imagine that people
Gibson
hear.
braces taper
No,
and...
for them.
Oh, and aren't... I thought you didn't hear it. And aren't actually tucked into the lining of the guitar, the way a Martin is. They actually kind of did. They just didn't bother cutting out. They just stuck them on top. And Martin brace ends, and like most, you know, more intelligent guitar builders, are tucked in there, and so the brace is wiggling, but it's kind of locked into the linings. Or in the case of the finger braces or the tone bars, they feather out to absolutely nothing, nice and long, and so they can flex with the top. Gibson just like, man, let's just carve them, done. And so they rattle loose all the time, right? Sorry, and now I've completely, that was...
It's just the fact that they're not.
Oh, so what does it affect? So I think it has a lot to do with the effect of, I think it has a lot to do with the sound of these guitars. I think this is also part of why there aren't very many luthier-built guitars that actually sound like Gibsons. You can make a 00018, a new 00018 that gets pretty close to a 00018 sort of sound. But I couldn't build an LOO that sounds like an LOO because I'm too picky about making it good. And if I'm going to tuck my brace ends in because I don't want to have to fix it. I want to put my bridge plate touching the X brace, not 3/8 of an inch away from the X brace. I want to put my bridge pin holes through the bridge plate, not behind it. And so none of us who build guitars want to build crap. That's not why we get into it. And so this is why people can't build a Gibson that sounds like a Gibson in 2023, because they're not prepared to build crap. Nobody wants that to get out that they build junk, right? But now, all these years later, it's endearing, and those construction shortcomings is what makes a great Gibson a great Gibson. But that's also what makes Gibsons inconsistent, and why there are great ones, and why there are total dogs. There aren't too many dogs in 1930s Martin speak. Even a bad one is going to be a pretty darn good guitar. There are dogs from the 30s in Gibson. There are some absolutely terrible guitars. And so, but that's the beauty, right? And that's why I love them. It's like, what are you going to get? You're rolling the dice, you know? Brian?
So, question for both of you. What is it about transitional guitars and them just being great? You know, for Gibson, I have an LOO that's got an elevated fingerboard that's got the solid linings, and that went away. That seemed to be right on the brink of like the 14 fret thing. I have a D18 that's got, you know, the wide neck, but it's got the shifted back braces. So what's up with the transitions?
Do you want to answer that?
Let's find out. Could everybody hear that, or should we repeat the question? Yeah, you can't hear
The
it.
question is, Brian's talking about he's got an LOO with an elevated fingerboard and solid linings, like a 32 kind of thing, and he's got a D18 that has it's a wide neck but rear brace guitar, and he's referencing these guitars that are a Banner Gibson or post Banner Gibson, or it has weird features. And he's asking, what's with those? How come they're so good? I have my ideas, but I've been talking for a while. Do you wanna...
I think this question was made for you.
Oh, okay. I'll answer it then.
Yeah.
My theory, and it's all theory because that's all we got, is that they had no clue, and we're building guitars and we're hoping that they wouldn't fall apart. And there's a sweet spot in guitar construction where a guitar sounds absolutely incredible but lasts 3 minutes, or a guitar that sounds like a coffee table and lasts as long as one. And somewhere in there is the perfect guitar for whoever it is that's making it. So a luthier could go towards that. It's going to last 10 years, but it's going to sound super incredible. But I'm going to build it in such a way that hopefully it'll last 20. Classical players know this, right? They play out their guitars, they're done. Conversely, a factory doesn't want to have to repair guitars for free. And if you look at the Gibson shipping ledgers, holy crap, there were a lot of guitars that got sent back for repairs. And if you have my job where you specialize in these early 30 Gibsons, oh man, like almost, I would say a third of the guitars that Gibson made before 1932 that crossed my bench, I'd say a third of them are retops. There's a ton of them. And I can spot it from a mile away now. But holy, top over dovetail, you know why you've heard about it? Because it's happened to everybody. And those guitars are retops.
This would be a good place for a Canadian swear, Mark.
Yeah.
Holy, he's just working all the way around it.
So those transitions are a sweet spot, right? That elevated board thing, who knows what the elevated board is doing? That's a happy accident. But in Gibson's transition from a way too lightly built LOO to a way too heavily built LOO, there's a magic period. And you found it with yours.
And it's a happy accident that didn't continue.
No.
It worked, it sounded great, and then they changed it.
Because they were falling apart, and they had to change it. So, yeah. Came back at night and ruined things. Yeah. Any other question?
Custom order came in from Kevin Eubanks, and he wanted a net width of the nut of 2 1/8 inch. And, you know, I struggled to find a fingerboard that wide, but did, and built the guitar for him. It was a D18. That's down to D18, and I never quite understood.
Dick's saying he had a custom order from a big star who asked him to make a D18 with a 2 1/8 inch fingerboard at the nut. I mean, think about that. Like a classical guitar is about 2 inches. That is a massive, yeah. It's about the same, yeah. But it's a massive neck. What was he putting nylon strings on it? Steel strings. Was it for 2 people to play at once? I mean, come on, you got to be kidding me. So the punchline was it was the best sounding guitar he ever heard.
Yeah. Yeah.
What did he say?
Oh, the Roy Smeck model had a really wide neck, and lots of people liked leaving them 2 1/8. I think they heard me.
You think these people could hear
I
it?
think so.
No
Oh,
way.
No.
No.
The Roy Smeck model has a really wide neck, as a 2 1/8 inch nut width, and a lot of people keep it that way when they do the conversions. But Dick's asking, what's up with that guitar? How come it sounds so good?
Oh yeah.
What do you think?
This takes me back to a discussion with Bill Collings, who used to play around with weights on the peg head, right? So, and it's part of the reason. Like, you want to grab that guitar for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Check out this guitar I made. It's like super light, but the heaviest thing on it is these massive tuners on the peg head.
Do you want me to be Vanna White?
Thank you, Vanna.
No.
So the weight on the peg head, that's another percentage, right? It's like if somebody, if I can talk somebody into those tuners, which is a lot easier now with the Riker tuners that are 10-to-1 ratio instead of 4-to-1, I talked most of my clients into the 4-to-1, and they begrudgingly went along, and most of them, almost all of them, eventually got by with them. That's no problem now with the 10-to-1. But this is me doing what Kevin Eubanks accidentally did with the D18, because he added that mass at the peg head up here, which changes the way the whole body vibrates. But nobody except Kevin Eubanks can play that. So I'm not going to start using that, but thanks for the tip, Dick.
But is that a thing? Like the difference between a wide neck and a 38 and a 39?
Oh, that's such a
Model, like-
small percentage. I think it's really tough to measure, but it may be that it's no coincidence that my favorites are always the wide neck,
Right.
or tend to be the wide neck. Yeah.
There's a lot of customers that we have that change their vintage tuners off of their guitars and they put modern tuners on. A lot of the electric guys, the people that play Sunburst Les Pauls or dot neck 335s, they actually prefer the ones that have been grovered because of the weight and the headstock and what that does for their sustain and their evenness of notes.
I have to interrupt this regularly scheduled program and say I'm getting the notice that we're out of time. I don't know how out of time. We could be way out of time because we've been having so much fun. Hope you've been having fun too. Thank you. And also, I just want to acknowledge that there are people here who know as much and more than we do. So thank you to everyone, but especially those people who sat through this presentation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, that was it, folks. I welcome your comments. You can hit me up at podcast@fretboardjournal.com. Please get your tickets to the Fretboard Summit 2024 while you can. And thank you, as always, for letting me into your headphones or your car or wherever you tune in every week. Consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps others find this oh so quirky, oh so geeky, but oh so fun show. Till next time.